For about 50 years now, Andy Swash and I have been making wildlife trips to various parts of Europe and beyond. But in the last 20 years or so, we've increasingly focused our attentions on dragonflies. Now, some of you will be aware that we had produced together Britain's Dragonflies, and now in its fourth edition. But it seemed an inevitable conclusion that we would start work on Europe's dragonflies. So here is the product, which was finally published this year. And this presentation is, I hope, going to portray a sample of the rather nice species that you can find in various parts of Europe. I hope you enjoy it. So here's a map of species richness. The important thing to focus on first is the area that we've covered in the book. You'll notice that we have excluded the far east of Europe up to the Urals. It's a poorly known and poorly visited area, but we have included the Micronesian islands, the Mediterranean islands, and Western Turkey, as these are all popular holiday destinations and quite well known. So look at the species richness now, and you can see a very obvious belt across the mid-latitudes of Europe of high diversity. But there are also some pockets further south in southern Iberia and around the Balkans. Now, we cover 140 species in the book. Most of these are breeding species. There's a few vagrants, of course. And about 2/3 of those are dragonflies. Now, put in a global context, that's actually a really small number. Europe is not a particularly rich continent for dragonflies. Most of the 6,000 odd, maybe 7,000 odd species globally occur in the tropics, of course, and relatively few in temperate regions. Actually, to put that further into perspective, we only have about 50 species in Britain, barely 40 breeding species. So there's quite a lot that you can see just across the channel. And over 100 of those you could find fairly easily in short holidays to these 5 locations. Each of those trips, maybe 5 or 10 days, you could hope to see up to 50 species. And although I'm going to focus on these areas, let's not forget that further north, particularly in the Boreal-alpine regions, there are other species, particularly hawkers, darters, and whitefaces occurring. This area of France, La Brenne is an area of thousands of lakes dug for aquaculture, for fish farming. These are sequentially drained mostly, and every 10 years perhaps each lake will be dry for a short period. Nevertheless, it's a very rich area for wildlife, including dragonflies. And I've added to this Vienne, just to the west of La Brenne Regional Park. And it makes a good range of species to be seen in a relatively small area south of the Loire Valley. Remember, we're only a few hours drive south of the English Channel here, and there's a really good range. France, being the largest country in Europe, I suppose it comes as no surprise, has the largest dragonfly list at about 100 species. But you can see, as I said, maybe half of those in this really quite restricted area. One of the early species appearing in April-May time is the Eurasian basket tail. It's one of the most elusive European species and tends to occur before the main peaks of dragonflies later in the summer. is a lake that's very suited to spreadwings, in part because of this regular draining and removal of fish. The small spreadwing here is able to withstand that dry period because, like other spreadwings or emerald damselflies, they overwinter as eggs in plant material. Another species that can tolerate this occasional draining is the common winter damsel, and these spend the winter hibernating away from water, so they're free of any problems with desiccation. This is a more permanent pond with a fantastic growth of submerged aquatics, pondweeds there just below the surface. And this particular one hosts a species we lost from Britain and have just about regained, and that's the dainty bluet or dainty damselfly. And here you can see several pairs egg laying in tandem into the pondweeds in that little pond. There are fenlands in La Brenne, and as well as things we're more familiar with, like the green-eyed hawker or Norfolk hawker, we can find yellow-spotted emerald. So this is a species that was in fact added to the British list, came as rather a surprise to us in 2018. And there are both slow-flowing and, here in Vienne, a fast-flowing river. And alongside some of these, we'll be looking for gomphids. So the clubtail family is a small pincer tail. And late in the day and flying into the evening, you might see this rather somberly coloured hawker known as the Western Spectre. In France, quite a lot of the rivers are dammed on occasions, periodically to hold back water during dry spells, retain fish. But nice, quiet, still waters are very good for species like the orange-spotted emerald. The orange-spotted emerald was lost as a breeding species from Britain in the 1960s. It does occur just across the Channel, not too far from the Channel coast in northern France. But here in La Brenne, it's relatively easy to find along these calm rivers and occasionally at lakes. Any emerald dragonfly sighting is a good one, but these are particularly special because they live in a genus of their own, Oxygastra, and in fact they're a bit of a taxonomic quandary because the taxonomists don't know quite where to place them. One area not to be missed near La Brenne, in fact near Poitiers, is a heathland area with lots of ponds. This is known as Pinale, and Pinale owes its origin to millstone quarrying. This left behind over many hundreds of years a series of, indeed hundreds of lakes, little ponds of various sizes and types, set in a fabulous heathland setting. Two of the species to look for here are whitefaces at the top, the yellow-spotted whiteface or large whiteface, and down at the bottom, the lilypad whiteface, which does what it says on the tin. If we go further south to the Mediterranean coast, we find the Camargue, the Rhone Delta. Now this is an area between two branches of the Rhone, here on the left and centre of the map, with saline areas, hypersaline areas near the sea, giving way further inland to brackish lagoons and finally to freshwater marshes. Some of those have been converted to agriculture, to rice cultivation. And it has to be said that by and large the Rhone Delta proper doesn't have a great deal of dragonfly attraction, apart from huge numbers at times of things like red-veined darter, which can tolerate high salt content. However, to the east of the delta proper, within that oval, there are some really good freshwater marshy areas, a fantastic irrigation canal, and also a rather nice drainage canal that I'm going to talk about. So here in La Crau, we have semi-desert conditions. You wouldn't really expect this to be a great place for dragonflies, but flowing through it is the most fantastic irrigation channel. The Canal de Vergier, as you can see here, is really not very big, not very wide, therefore it's very easy to see dragonflies along here. And it is really quite fantastic for dragonflies and dragonfly watching. It's adorned, if not bejeweled, on its flanks by copper demoiselles, amongst others. The variety is so good here that people regard this as probably the single best dragonfly site in Europe. You will be checking the gomphids for large pincer tail here. And you'll be checking all the blue damsels. There are lots of mercury bluets or southern damselflies along here, but these are a pair of Mediterranean bluets, a highly localized red-listed species in southwest Europe. And also highly localized across Europe is the spotted darter, with those characteristic long black wedges on the side of the abdomen. This is a canal flowing through the Vallée des Baux, north of La Crau. These waters are particularly good for white-legged damselflies, featherlegs. Here's a pair of orange featherlegs, egg-laying. And here a pair of white featherlegs, egg-laying. Now both the Canal de Vergier and this canal are good areas for gomphids, for clubtail dragonflies. Here you may find on these rather still waters yellow clubtail. And if you're very lucky, another red-listed species, the pronged clubtail, highly restricted distribution in southwestern France and Iberia. Let's move on now to southern Iberia and focus on a small area of southwest Andalusia. Here's a rather fast-flowing river, and one of the things we're likely to see at places like this is the orange-winged dropwing. These are African species, one of several that have moved northwards in recent decades. These first proved to breed in Spain in 2008, and quite recently they've turned up even over the Pyrenees in southwest France, so likely to spread further. This is the epaulette skimmer, often found sitting on rocks along these rivers. And rather more specialised in the torrents and waterfalls of fast-flowing rivers is the ringed cascader. So again, like the other two species, here this is a mainly African species that just extends into southern Europe. This tributary of that river, rather calm and sedate, has a reputation for being a good place to see the very localized splendid cruiser. This is another southwestern endemic species, one which is very hard to find perched, as I found, and therefore I failed to get any photographs of it. So just to give you a flavour of the book, here are 4 fabulous images by Fons Peels. His images adorn a lot of the plates in the book, and there you can see the splendid cruiser. Elsewhere across southern Iberia, in marshes and other wetlands and slow-flowing rivers, there are other African dragonflies to be found, like the violet dropwing here, undoubtedly one of Europe's most colourful species. Down on the ground, in typical fashion, a banded groundling, a northern banded groundling, a long skimmer, which lives up to its name, and a black percher. This is a female that's become rather dark, almost black, like the male with age. Now, this may look like a common bluetail, but in fact, it's an Iberian bluetail. They are very difficult to separate, but it tends to be the default bluetail in this part of Iberia. The city of Cordoba, and flowing through it, the Guadalquivir River that flows to the coast, where it meets the Cotadoniana Reserve. But here at Cordoba, there are large numbers of a very localized clubtail emerging. Not easy to see, simply because it blends in extremely well with the dry vegetation along the banks of the river. Like many clubtails, you're best looking away from water for these. I should have said that was the faded pincertail. I have to confess to having a love affair with Bulgaria. I've made lots of trips here over the last 20 years, including about a dozen focused in midsummer for dragonflies. There are lots of these small lakes, reservoirs for irrigation and for livestock drinking, and they all have a fantastic range of dragonflies. Some of them we can start to see in Britain these days, like the blue-eyed hawker, but others haven't yet reached our shores. This is a white-tailed skimmer, tiny little white appendages there giving it its name. And the southern darter, here very typically laden with mites on the wings. Rather more erratically, one can sometimes find vagrant emperors, including breeding populations of these sometimes. And ditto for dark spreadwing, a large spreadwing that has a very localized distribution across southern Europe. And equally rare in Bulgaria, the black pennant, which also has a very scattered distribution, mainly in southeastern Europe. Where trees fringe watercourses and ponds, you'll be looking for willow emerald damselflies or willow spreadwings. This is the eastern willow spreadwing. There is an overlap in Bulgaria with western willow spreadwing, and for that reason you have to look carefully at the rear end of males and females for intricate differences between the two species. Rather easier to identify, it has to be said, is the banded darter, the lovely, delightful banded darter. These are usually at small streams, not common, but can turn up almost anywhere. The first ones of these I saw looked rather splendid in a huge field of sunflowers. Bordering the Greek boundary is the Rhodope Mountains. The eastern Rhodope Mountains are rather lower than the western ones where skiing takes place in winter. But here we can see a stream that dries up in late summer, and it's one of the classic locations for us to go looking for one of Europe's unique dragonflies. It's a damselfly that thinks it's a dragonfly. It's called the odalisque. The males there on the right become pruinose, unusual in damselflies to have that extent of pruinosity. And on the left, the rather attractive female. Along the same sort of streams, often in the shade, one finds the eastern spectre, not closely related to the western spectre we saw earlier, and in fact in a genus of its own. Also along these streams, something that looks a little bit like a brilliant emerald. In fact, it looks almost identical to a brilliant emerald, apart from a small yellow fleck on the side of the thorax. And of course, where there's running water, there are going to be golden rings. So these two species tend not to occur in the same locations, thankfully, but deciding which one you've got can be quite tricky. And again, it's another pair of species where you really need to try and see the rear end in some detail, ideally in the hand. Wonderful area, again near the Greek border in the eastern Rhodope Mountains, is where a new species of dragonfly was found only just over 20 years ago. So where this river flows through those mountains, in 1999, Milan Marinov happened by chance upon some emerald damselflies flying quite early in the summer, in fact in May, before the Balkan emeralds take flight. They looked a little bit like downy emerald, which is localized in Bulgaria. And when he caught them, he realized that they were very different to both Balkan and downy emeralds. So Milen had discovered the Bulgarian emerald. This is a male hanging up, and here a female, rather late in the season, in late June, and she has only got 3.5 wings, but still managed to fly around and lay eggs. Now, one of the things you need to try and see on these, if you're lucky enough to get one at rest, is the yellow cheek patch, which is lacking in other species of emerald. Notice that these are quite downy as well, like the downy emerald, and that reflects the fact that they're flying around early in the summer. Finally, let's have a look near the Dalyan Delta in southwest Turkey. Dalyan is a good base for a holiday here. Inland from Dalyan is the large Kuychiz Lake. The big attraction for dragonflies here is a very large population of this huge gomphid, the blade tail. Although it starts off black and pale yellow, with maturity, it often becomes pruinose like this one. This is a rather odd skimmer, in European terms anyway, where most of our males go blue. This is the slender skimmer. And that woodland fringing the lake is one of a relic of several liquid amber or sweet gum woodlands. Inside these woodlands there may be watercourses with interesting dragonflies, yellow-spotted emeralds, eastern willow spreadwings, and if you're lucky, small numbers of this little red damsel, known as the Turkish red damsel. For all the world, it's like a slightly large version of the small red damselfly we have in Britain. Inland from Kuychiz are faster flowing rivers, bigger watercourses. Here up in the mountains where it's very fast flowing, there can be good populations of gomphids. Here's a common, and what would over most of Europe be called a common clubtail, but this is in fact a Turkish clubtail, which just extends into southeastern Europe. The blue-eyed golden ring, similar distribution, lots of yellow on this, so quite a dramatic golden ring, and of course those lovely blue-green eyes. And if you're lucky, a few dark pincer tails. Also just inland from Courchees, a couple of nice small rivers starting to dry up here in early June. And here on the rocks we can see skimmers, like small skimmer on the left, which has a mainly Asian distribution, alongside an epaulette skimmer to the right. So that's an African species. Indigo dropwing, also an Asian species, creeping into Europe here. And quite recently, in the last 10 years, there have been a few records of red-veined dropwing, a rather handsome, again, African species that's started to occur in parts of southern Europe. But the real treasure here is the very aptly named Magnificent Emperor. This is Europe's largest dragonfly and well worth the effort of searching for it. Really quite spectacular. Okay, so that's been a very rapid rush through Europe's dragonflies. There are, as I said, across the channel, maybe 80 species more than you might have seen in Britain. And there are some great locations, not just for dragonflies, but for seeing other wildlife too. And I hope, like me, you can get out there and enjoy them. And of course, take a good book with you. Thank you for listening.